Hey, everybody. Welcome to video number 2 of our 6 Steps to CMMC Compliance video series. I am Orly Burlov.
I'm Noel Vestal.
All right. And you know us from Compliance Corner. But here we are to talk to you about step number 2 in this accept process. So video number 1 was, get to know your contract, see if you have to protect CUI, if you have a deforest clause. Well, in this video, we're assuming you checked your, you checked your contract, and now you know, do you have to protect CUI? All right. Assuming that you have to protect CUI, your main question is going to be, how do I manage my compliance costs? And that's a question that it's going to be top of mind just about everyone.
Yep.
So, I think the first thing to say here, or to kind of just put out there on the table is, well, in the CMMC proposed rule, which came out just last month in December, what did they say about managing your compliance costs? Because the DoD has to know that this is an issue for everyone.
They definitely do. They had quite a few commenters, quite a few. They even said that quite a few commenters were mentioning.
They have quite a few commenters?
Yes. I mean, how could they not?
Yeah, how couldn't they?
Because cost is very much, like you said, top of mind for everybody. I mean, there are so many small businesses. I mean, it's for big business as well, but especially those small to medium-sized businesses it's tough. It is tough. Every single nickel, every dime counts. So you want to make sure that you're getting, the bang for your buck that you can for this, definitely. But the DoD does mention in the proposed rule the impact of costs. And the way that they sort of talk about it is that if you are trying to recoup costs from already implementing NIST Standard 171, no, that's just a no.
No, that's a no-go.
According to the DoD, and they do have a point here, you should have already been doing this. So there's no reason for us to pay you for something you've already supposed to have been doing for the past almost 7 years. So I can kind of understand their point. Now, for the assessment cost, they state, it's a very interesting way. They state it that you can recoup those costs by including it in your competitively set prices. Now, that is something you can do. So you could, what that means, it's a fancy way of saying that, okay, if I'm going to charge, the government $100 an hour for this resource, I could make it $102 to try to recoup some of that money from the assessment costs I'm going to have. Now, this is a kind of tricky thing to do because, as we all know, as DoD contractors or former DoD contractors in my case, your price is really important, right? I mean, the government most times is looking for lowest cost, technically acceptable, right? So you have to be very delicate about that. So there are ways to do that, and you can build it into some of your costs, but you definitely cannot just call it out and say, okay, here's, $5,000 that I, spent on CMMC assessment. That's definitely not something you can do. You have to get a little more creative with it.
Got it. And so I think what you're saying is, is something that the DoD is expected, or specifically with compliance, that if you have to manage CUI, that status quo ante, you were supposed to be compliant back in 2017. So there's not going to be much sympathy from the DoD on you saying, well, I have to recover all these compliance costs.
Not really. I will say, however, a lot of different states, like almost all of them, I think it's almost all of them have. Yeah, I think it's all 50. I know it's quite a few of them if it's not all 50, but almost all of the states have some sort of small business program where that you can actually apply for grants for this type of thing. So so you can definitely reach out to those organizations. You can find small business. It's usually small. It's like the small business, whatever state you're in
SBA.
Office. Yeah, SBA, exactly. So usually you can find those, and they will actually, we have a couple customers I've actually spoken to who have received grants to be able to do their assessments. So that's also something to look into as well.
All right. So, we're talking about managing costs in this episode. I think one of the things that we've learned here at PreVeil is that one of the best way to manage costs is by scoping your environment. Do you want to just jump in and explain what that means?
Absolutely. So a good example would be, let's say we have a 50-person company. Now, if you were to have the scope be everyone, that means that's 50 endpoints to manage, 50 individuals.
I don't want to cut across you, but that means
no, of course,
everyone in your company, you're assuming that everyone in your company has to handle CUI, and everyone has to meet the compliance requirements.
Precisely. So let's make the assumption, because sometimes I'll talk to customers and they'll say, well, I'll ask them, where do you have CUI? And the answer is, well, everywhere. Yeah. Well, if it's everywhere, then that means everyone and every person and every device that is interacting with that CUI, sending that CUI, storing it, reading it, anything is going to be in scope. So again, if you have that 50-person company and you've got CUI everywhere, then that means every endpoint, that's every laptop that they use, every mobile device that they use to access CUI, that's all going to be in scope. And in some ways, and then the FCI part of it as well, because that's level 1. So like, do you have FCI floating around everywhere? Are there going to be 50 people who are going to need access to that? So now if you then maybe take what has become very popular in the past couple of years and what a lot of our customers at PreVeil use PreVeil for is an enclave approach, where it's sort of like its own little universe that it can sit on your existing machine. Let's say you have a commercial machine. You don't want to have a separate machine for CUI. Well, you could then have something like PreVeil, or there's also multiple other options out there that do the same thing, but I happen to know PreVeil the best. So yeah, if you go the enclave approach, those 50 people, let's say you take all that CUI and you start realizing as you scoped, as we started talking about, right? The scope is important. So you start thinking about it, you know what, actually, there's only really 5 people that actually need CUI access.
Right.
So now you've gone from 50 endpoints and 50 people to 5. That is a significantly easier, it's easier to manage. It's easy. It takes way less time and it costs less money.
Yeah. And the other thing is it's going to cost a lot less to assess at the end. So
oh gosh, yes.
It's like a win-win all across the food chain.
Absolutely. Yeah. You are definitely going to be in a much better situation with the assessor for sure. And the assessor is going to feel a lot more confident in what you're doing because they can see you're taking it seriously. If you go to an assessor and say, we have CUI everywhere, and they figure out very quickly that's not really what you need to have, that's not going to look good for you. So it's important. You want to have that. You want to make sure that your assessor feels comfortable with what you've done.
Yeah. So just to kind of spend a moment there talking about the example that you put forward. All right. So you have a 50-person company. That's pretty typical out there in terms of the manufacturing world. Yeah, and definitely. So we're assuming that only 5 people really manage CUI on their endpoints. So, that's 1/10 of the company.
Yep.
And so that means only 1/10 of the company needs to have a PreVeil type solution.
Right.
That means only, one of those 5 people need to have endpoint protection.
Yep.
Need to make sure that those 5 people just are the only ones that need to go through training. What else would you add to that list?
Also, it means that those, think about this, just the sheer number of licenses you would need for all the solutions, the technological solutions that you would use. It's not just like a PreVeil solution. It's also all your endpoint management that you need to do. A lot of that is based on your actual number of users. So if you have 50 users and it's, $50 a license, that adds up really quick. If you have 5 users, right. If it's 5 users at $50, that is a huge discount right there alone, right? And again, that also is all the other technologies, because remember, there are also security protection assets you have to account for. So that's like if you do a vulnerability scanner or any sort of endpoint management protection, that is all going to be included in that. So that also could increase the cost the more people you have and the more devices you have using it.
And so correct me if I'm wrong here. So in that little scenario we were talking about, really anything that touches CUI, whether that's the printer, the server, all of those are going to have to be in scope. So Correct. Having this much smaller environment footstep probably will significantly.
Yeah, right. It absolutely reduces your overall CMMC assessment footprint considerably doing it that way, for sure.
Got it. All right. I think we've answered the questions that we set out to answer. If you like this video, hit like down below. We have links to our previous videos in the show notes. So comment, let us know what you think, and we will see you next time on video number 3.
Bye.
Bye-bye.